I never thought one sentence, just a single stupid slip of the tongue, could change how my brother looks at me. But here I am, lying awake at night, replaying it over and over. The look on his face, the way the room went silent, the way my sister-in-law froze clutching her baby as if I'd just cursed at her instead of, well, blurting out something I didn't even mean to say. It wasn't planned. It wasn't cruel, at least not intentionally. But somehow it hit like a punch, and now it feels like everything between us has shifted. So I keep asking myself, am I the asshole for saying, it's genetic about my brother's baby? That's what I said. Two little words that sounded like a joke in my head but came out sharp, cutting mean, maybe even unforgivable. This isn't just about one comment, though. It's about history, about family, about how some people carry an energy that unsettles you the moment they walk into a room, and about how sometimes that energy feels like it runs in the bloodline. I know what I said sounds awful when you strip it down to the words. But if you knew the whole story, if you knew my sister-in-law, my brother, my mom, and the weight of everything that came before, maybe you'd understand why the words slipped out. Or maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you'd decide I'm every bit the villain my brother thinks I am. But that's the question, isn't it? Am I cruel or just careless? Am I the asshole? To make sense of what happened, you need to know who we are. Because family isn't just names on paper. It's habits, history, grudges, love, loyalty, and all the little quirks that make us who we are. Let's start with me. My name's Emily Carter. I'm 28. I've always been the kind of person who laughs too loud at jokes, who blurts things out before thinking, who sometimes says the wrong thing in the wrong moment. I'm not mean-spirited, but I don't exactly come with a filter either. If my thoughts were a faucet, the handle's a little loose. Things drip out. Then there's my brother, Michael Carter. He's 32, just 4 years older, but growing up, he always felt like he was 10 years ahead of me in maturity. He was the steady one, the protector, the kid who made sure I didn't drown at the community pool or get lost at the county fair. We lost our dad when I was still young, and Michael stepped into that protective role almost without question. I leaned on him more than I realized. He was my anchor. But even anchors can drift when they meet someone new. That someone was Vanessa Hayes now, Vanessa Carter, my sister-in-law. She's complicated. If you ask me, she's distant, maybe even cold. If you ask my mom, she's icy, intimidating, a woman who walks into a room and makes it 10 degrees colder without saying a word. If you ask my brother, though, he'll tell you she's the love of his life. I suppose she is. Because for him, she smiles. For him, she laughs. For him, she shows up. But for the rest of us, she rarely comes around. Family gatherings twice a year, maybe. She doesn't linger, doesn't chat, doesn't engage. It's like she has a wall around her, and if you're not Michael, you're on the other side of it. And then there's my mom, Linda Carter. She's 55, sharp-tongued, and a little superstitious. She has this way of forming opinions that stick like glue. And once she decides something about someone, it's almost impossible to change her mind. About Vanessa's family, for instance, she swears Vanessa's father, Richard Hayes, was terrifying back when they were in school. She's told me more than once she thinks something's off about him. Dark, dangerous even. She half jokes that he's a psychopath, though I don't think she means it entirely as a joke. Last but not least, there's Sophie Carter, my niece. She's 9 months old, tiny, and perfect in every way babies usually are. Chubby cheeks, soft hair, little fists that clench and unclench like she's already holding secrets. She should be the light that pulls us all together, and in some ways she is. But she's also the spark that ignited the worst fight I've ever had with my brother. Because Sophie has her mother's eyes, her mother's stare, that unsettling, piercing look that makes you feel small. And one day when I saw it for myself, the words I should have swallowed came tumbling out instead. But I'll get to that. First, you need to understand what that stare means in our family, and why, when I saw it reflected in a baby's face, I couldn't help but think, Jesus Christ, it's genetic. If you really want to understand what happened that day, you have to see the threads that tie, and sometimes strangle my family. My brother Michael and I weren't just siblings. For a long time, we were a team. After Dad died, Mom worked long hours to keep a roof over our heads. Michael picked up the slack in ways no teenager should have to. He helped me with homework, drove me to practice, showed up at school plays when Mom couldn't. In my eyes, he was part brother, part father, part shield from the world. And me, I was his shadow. His annoying little sister, yes, but also his confidant. We used to stay up late whispering in the dark, making plans for when we were older. He'd tell me he'd never let anyone hurt me, that we'd always have each other. I believed him. I still do in some part of me. But then Vanessa entered the picture. I remember the first time Michael brought her around, Thanksgiving a few years back. She walked into the house like she was walking into enemy territory. Polite smile, perfect posture, but eyes scanning the room like a security camera. When she shook my hand, her grip was cool firm and just a little too long, like she was testing me. And when she looked at me, really looked at me, I felt myself shrink an inch. Michael was smitten, though. He looked at her the way some people look at fireworks, dazzled, wide-eyed, convinced they're witnessing magic. He saw warmth where I felt frost. He saw love where I felt distance. From that moment on, there was a shift. Michael didn't pull away from me, not exactly, but it was clear his world now revolved around Vanessa. He came to fewer family dinners, missed a couple of birthdays, and when he did show up, it was always with her by his side. She rarely spoke much, but the room bent around her. Mom tried in her own way. She'd make conversation, ask polite questions, but Vanessa's answers were short-clipped, as if words were a currency she wasn't about to spend on us. Eventually, Mom stopped trying. I kept telling myself, maybe Vanessa was just shy, just private, but deep down, I knew she didn't like us. Not me, not Mom, not anyone outside of Michael. That's the dynamic. Now Michael is the bridge, Vanessa is the wall, and I'm somewhere stuck on the other side, still trying to find a way back to my brother. So when they had a baby Sophie, I thought maybe things would change. Babies have a way of softening people, don't they? They turn walls into windows, cracks into doors. I hoped Sophie would be that door. I wanted to love her, to be the kind of aunt who babysits and spoils and becomes a fixture in her life. I wanted her to be the glue that pulled us back together. But of course, that's not how things went. The problem with Vanessa isn't just that she's quiet or distant or reserved. It's the way she looks at people. That stare. I don't even know how to describe it fully. It's sharp, piercing, unflinching. When her eyes lock on you, it's like she can see straight through your skin and into the part of you you'd rather keep hidden. Some people talk about feeling judged. With Vanessa, it's worse. You don't just feel judged, you feel dismissed. Small. Foolish. It's not loud or dramatic. She doesn't roll her eyes, doesn't sneer. It's just a look. But it cuts deeper than words ever could. Mom says her father was the same way. Richard Hayes. They went to school together back in the 70s. Mom remembers walking down the hallway and catching him staring not at her, but through her, like she wasn't even real. She tells stories about how he scared teachers, how fights seemed to break out whenever he was around, how people whispered he had a darkness about him. Psycho Mom says almost casually, as if diagnosing him like a doctor. There was something not right about that man. I don't know if she's exaggerating. Moms do that sometimes, turning memory into legend. But I can't deny that Vanessa has the same unnerving stare. And whether it's nature or nurture, whether it's fair or not, the thought is stuck in my head. Maybe it's in the blood. That's the tension I've carried for years. I've tried to brush it off, to tell myself I was being unfair, that it's just a look, and I shouldn't judge someone by it. But every time Vanessa fixes her eyes on me, I feel like I'm shrinking back into that insecure little sister who never measured up. And then Sophie came along. The baby was supposed to be a fresh start. But when I first held her in my arms, expecting warmth, expecting a giggle or a smile, what I got instead was that look, that same stare. And before I could stop myself, the words fell out. Jesus Christ. It's genetic. Words I'll never be able to take back. Families are strange creatures. They don't just trade recipes and holiday traditions. They trade stories, half-truths, and warnings that pass down like heirlooms. And in my family, one of those heirlooms has always been the Hayes stare. That phrase didn't start with me. It started with my mom. She has this way of talking about the past that makes it feel alive, like it's happening in the room with you. And more than once, usually, after Vanessa left, one of our family gatherings early, Mom would sit back, fold her arms, and say, "Well, what do you expect? She's Richard Hayes' daughter." When I was a kid, the name didn't mean anything to me. But to Mom, it meant trouble. She went to high school with Richard, Vanessa's father. She paints him as the kind of boy who always lingered on the edges. Not popular, not friendly, but unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. She says he carried himself like he owned the hallways, even though no one really liked him. That he had this way of staring at people, locking eyes until they looked away, leaving them rattled. He wasn't loud, wasn't a bully in the traditional sense, but his silence was heavier than fists. Some people whispered about fights he got into behind the gym. Others swore teachers were afraid of him. And Mom Well, Mom swears he had something missing, like the empathy switch wasn't installed at birth. She's told me a dozen times she thought he was dangerous even before he was grown. And when Vanessa came into our lives, Mom swore she saw the same look, the same hollow weight behind her eyes. Now, I know my mom isn't exactly a neutral source. She has a sharp tongue and a sharper memory. She also has a flair for dramatics. Her stories get taller with every retelling. So part of me always wondered if she was being unfair. People are more than their parents. I mean, I'd hate to be judged solely on my father's flaws. But then again, sometimes you see a pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's what made me uneasy when Sophie was born. Babies are supposed to be fresh slates, blank canvases, pure innocence. But in the back of my mind, I carried my mother's warning like a heavy stone. It runs in the family. I didn't expect to see it so soon. I didn't expect to feel it in a 9-month-old's gaze, and I definitely didn't expect to say the thing out loud. But we'll get there. For now, picture this a family gathering where hope and tension sat side by side at the table, where every smile came with a shadow. That's where it all began. It was a Sunday afternoon in early spring when I finally got the chance to meet Sophie properly. She was 9 months old, already crawling, already pulling herself up on furniture. Michael and Vanessa invited us over. It wasn't a big event, just a family visit, me, Mom, and them. Still, it felt monumental. Babies have a way of turning any ordinary afternoon into an occasion. The house smelled faintly of baby lotion and fresh laundry when we walked in. Vanessa was in the living room, perched on the couch like a queen on her throne. Sophie balanced on her lap. Michael hovered nearby, beaming with the pride of a new father. I remember my heart thumping in my chest. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted Sophie to like me. I wanted Vanessa, maybe just once, to see me as more than an intruder in her carefully guarded world. "Do you want to hold her?" Michael asked, his face glowing. Of course I did. My hands itched with the urge to scoop her up, to press my cheek against that soft baby skin. I nodded eagerly, and Vanessa handed her over with careful precision as though passing a priceless artifact. Sophie was warm and solid in my arms. She smelled faintly of powder and milk. For a moment, I felt that swell of tenderness everyone talks about, the one that makes your heart squeeze and your throat tighten. But then it happened. She looked up at me, and it wasn't the wide, curious stare of a baby. It wasn't innocent wonder. It was sharp, piercing, unblinking. It was that look, the haze stare. I froze, my mind tripping over itself. All the family stories, all my mom's warnings, every awkward moment with Vanessa. It all crashed into me at once. And before I could stop myself, before my brain could slam on the brakes, my mouth betrayed me. "Jesus Christ," I muttered. "It's genetic." The words slipped out like steam escaping a kettle, quiet, unplanned, but scalding nonetheless. And just like that, the air in the room changed. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had stepped off a cliff. Jesus Christ, it's genetic. I didn't shout. I didn't sneer. I didn't even mean for anyone to hear it. It was more like a mutter, the kind of comment you make to yourself under your breath when you're startled. But the room was quiet, too quiet, and every syllable carried farther than I wanted it to. Sophie was still in my arms, staring up at me with those wide, unblinking eyes. They were blue, the clear, icy shade her mother carried, the kind of eyes that didn't soften even when paired with a baby's cheeks and a gummy half smile. I swear, in that instant, I felt like I was staring down Vanessa herself, shrunken into miniature form. It was uncanny. Too uncanny. My nerves fired off like 1,000 sparks. The words slipped out before reason could catch them. And then, time slowed. Vanessa stiffened on the couch, her spine straightening like a drawn bow. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the color draining from her face. She didn't say a word, but her silence roared louder than anything. Michael froze too. His smile collapsed, replaced by something dark, protective, almost feral. He took a single step toward me, then stopped as though restraining himself. Even Sophie reacted, not by crying, not by fussing, but by staring even harder. Her little body was warm in my arms, but her gaze felt like ice. Panic clawed at me. My chest tightened. Suddenly, the baby felt heavy, unbearably heavy, like I wasn't fit to hold her anymore. I pulled her closer to my chest for just a second, then quickly handed her back to Vanessa, who accepted her with mechanical precision. My cheeks burned. My stomach churned. My mind scrambled for a way to backpedal, to laugh it off, to explain. But the words caught in my throat. My tongue had betrayed me once already, better to keep it locked in place. So I did what I always do when I'm embarrassed. I fled. I mumbled something about needing to check on the food, slipped into the kitchen, and busied myself with the first thing I saw: a stack of plates on the counter. I arranged them, rearranged them, pretended to care deeply about whether the forks were on the left or the right, anything to avoid the weight of the silence I had left behind, but I could still feel it. Even from the other room, the sting of my words hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker, and I knew this wasn't something I could sweep under the rug. I wish I could tell you the silence ended quickly, that someone cracked a joke, that Vanessa brushed it off, that Michael rolled his eyes and told me to quit being weird, but none of that happened. When I peeked back into the living room, the atmosphere had shifted. Heavily. Vanessa sat stiffly, Sophie balanced on her hip. Her lips hadn't moved, but her eyes had. They followed me sharp and unblinking, as though daring me to come back and sit down. It wasn't anger in the obvious sense, no shouting, no glare, just that same frozen judgment she carried like armor. Michael was a storm. He didn't yell, not yet, but the tension radiated off him in waves. His jaw was tight, his arms crossed, his whole body coiled like a spring. He kept glancing at me in the kitchen doorway, then back at Vanessa and the baby, as if trying to decide where his loyalty needed to land. Spoiler, it wasn't with me. Mom sensed it too. She tried to smooth things over, chatting about nothing, filling the space with idle talk about the weather, the neighbors, the casserole in the oven. But it was useless. Words bounced off the walls and fell flat. I kept myself busy with dishes that didn't need washing, cabinets that didn't need opening. I could feel my heart racing, my hands trembling slightly as I stacked and restacked the same plates. Eventually, Michael spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice through the quiet. "Not funny, Emily." 2 words. That's all he said, but the weight in them was enough to pin me to the floor. I wanted to argue, to say I didn't mean it as a joke, or that it wasn't even directed at Sophie, or that my brain just misfired. But the truth was simpler. I'd said it, and no excuse would erase it. So I stayed quiet. For the rest of the afternoon, I hovered on the edges, speaking only when spoken to, doing everything I could to make myself small. Vanessa didn't speak to me at all. Not one word. She kept Sophie close, as though I'd somehow proven myself unworthy of holding her. When we finally left, Mom gave me a look, part sympathy, part warning, but she didn't say anything until later. And Michael, he didn't hug me goodbye. He didn't even look at me. He just closed the door behind us with a quiet finality that felt louder than any slam. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was a fracture, and fractures don't heal easily. The car ride home that night was quiet, but I knew it wasn't the end of it. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Words like that don't just vanish. They linger, echoing long after the sound is faded. And sure enough, the confrontation came sooner than I expected. Michael called me 2 nights later. His voice was clipped tight, like he'd been rehearsing what he wanted to say. I answered the phone, trying to sound normal, as if maybe he just wanted to chat. But I barely got a hello out before he launched in. "Why would you say that about Sophie?" he demanded. The question wasn't casual. It wasn't curious. It was sharp, accusatory, like he was holding me under a spotlight. I froze. My throat tightened. "Mike, you did," he cut me off. "You said it's genetic, like there's something wrong with her, like she's some kind of defect." His voice cracked on the last word, equal parts rage and heartbreak. I scrambled to explain. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean it like that. She gave me a look and I panicked and it slipped out. I wasn't saying anything bad about her. You called my daughter genetic," he snapped. "Do you know how that sounds? Do you know how cruel that is?" I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth was, I didn't. Not really. Not until I heard it repeated and his voice loaded with hurt. "I love her, Emily," he said, quieter now. "She's perfect. And you, of all people, you should know better. You don't joke about babies. You don't say things that make it sound like they're broken." His words cut deep because he was right. I did know better. At least I should have. But still, part of me bristled. I wasn't saying she's broken, I insisted, my voice rising. I was talking about her stare. She has Vanessa's stare. You know exactly what I meant. That was the wrong thing to say. I heard it in the way his breath caught on the other end. "So now you're insulting my wife too," he said, his voice flat dangerous. "No, that's not," I stammered. "I just meant." But it was no use. He wasn't listening anymore. Or maybe he was listening too much, hearing not just what I said, but what I meant, what I implied, what I'd been carrying for years. The silence stretched. Then he said, "I don't even know who you are right now." And just like that, the line went dead. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, the weight of his words pressing harder than any silence Vanessa had ever thrown my way. I replayed that conversation 100 times in my head, 1,000. Each time it twisted into something different. Sometimes I was the villain, cruel and careless. Sometimes I was the misunderstood sister punished for a slip of the tongue. But the truth was murkier. Why did I say it? That's the question that haunted me. On the surface, it was just a reflex. A startled reaction to a baby's stare that felt too grown-up, too familiar. But deeper down, I knew it wasn't random. The words came from somewhere. They came from years of watching Vanessa narrow her eyes at me, from years of Mom's whispers about Richard Hayes, from all the unease that had settled in my chest since Vanessa became part of our family. I'd absorbed those suspicions like secondhand smoke, and in that moment holding Sophie, I exhaled them without even realizing it. That's what made the guilt so heavy. Because as much as I wanted to insist it was a joke, a slip, a nothing, I also knew it was rooted in something real, something I felt but had never said aloud. I wasn't just describing a baby's look. I was labeling her, branding her with her mother's reputation, her grandfather's shadow, my mother's fears. I'd taken one innocent moment and tied it to a lifetime of baggage she never asked for. And she was only 9 months old. That realization gutted me. But alongside the guilt was something uglier. Defensiveness. A stubborn voice whispering, "But it's true. She does have the stare. You weren't wrong." That voice argued with me late at night when I stared at the ceiling. It reminded me of the way Sophie's eyes locked on mine unflinching. It replayed Vanessa's icy glare the way she'd always made me feel like an intruder. It asked me why I should be crucified for speaking aloud what everyone else noticed, but wouldn't dare say. Was it cruel to say it? Absolutely. Was it honest? Yes, in a way. And maybe that's the heart of the problem. Honesty and cruelty sometimes wear the same face. I wanted to call Michael back, to apologize, to explain, to beg him to understand. But every time I picked up the phone, I heard his voice again. "I don't even know who you are right now." And maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't know who I was either. All I knew was that one careless sentence had cracked something in our family. And no matter how much I replayed it, I couldn't piece it back together. After Michael hung up, the silence in my apartment felt like a verdict. I moved through the next few days like I was underwater, everything muffled, heavy, distorted by the roar in my head. It was amazing how a life could stay exactly the same and still feel completely altered. The coffee maker sputtered the same. The neighbor's dog barked at the same squirrels. The mail still found its way to my door. And yet every ordinary thing seemed to ask me the same question. "What have you done?" Mom called, of course. She waited a day, then another, the way you'd wait for a thunderstorm to pass before stepping back onto the porch. When she finally rang, her voice was softer than usual, as if volume alone could shatter me. "Have you talked to your brother?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Not since the call," I said. He's furious." A long exhale. "He's a father," she said. "Fury is the shell that forms around fear." She paused, and I could hear the clink of her spoon in a mug, a distant kitchen ritual. "But Emily, words harden too. You know that." "I do," I said. "I know." What I didn't tell her was that I drafted half a dozen apologies in my head and deleted every one. Each version kept tripping over the same split in me, the part that was deeply sorry for hurting Michael and the part that still wanted to defend the bare fact of what I'd seen. Those two parts of me circled each other like wary animals, neither willing to lie down. Days turned into a week. Text threads that once pinged with dumb memes and grocery sales went quiet. Our family group chat limped along, Mom sending photos of the cat me answering with a heart, Michael not replying at all. It's incredible how absence leaves fingerprints. Then came Sunday dinner. That old ritual survived divorce and grief and tight budgets. It felt wrong to skip it now. Mom cooked roast chicken, potatoes, green beans with the blackened edges I always steal before we sit. I arrived early out of habit and nerves and set the table. I put out 3 plates and hesitated over the 4th. Vanessa rarely came. Still, inertia made my hand reach for the extra plate, then retreat. The ache that followed was ridiculous and real. Michael texted 10 minutes before the hour, running late. "We'll come next week. Will." The word caught in my throat. For a second, I pictured them, Michael, Vanessa, and the baby. A small triangle with no room for me inside it. I typed, "Okay, love you." I didn't add "I'm sorry." Not yet. Not like this. Mom pretended not to notice the quiet pocket where my brother usually Saturday. She asked about my week, about the office, about whether the landlord had finally fixed the wobbly step. She skirted the crater like a seasoned mountaineer. We ate, we cleaned. She sent me home with leftovers the way she always did, pressing a warm container into my hands like a benediction. On the drive back, I passed the park where Michael and I used to race bicycles until the streetlights came on. I pulled over without meaning to and sat there with the engine ticking, watching a kid wobble along on training wheels, while a patient father jogged beside him, one hand on the seat. The memory pulled me back by the collar, Michael, age 12, doing the same for me, warm hand steadying, laughing when I crashed into the grass and came up green-streaked and furious. "I've got you," he said then. And he did. He always did. Now I was the wobbling one, and there was no hand on the seat. In the days that followed, the story stretched itself into the spaces of everything else. At work, when a coworker dropped a coffee mug and it exploded into porcelain confetti, I flinched like it was my fault. At the grocery store, I stood too long in front of the baby aisle, staring at rows of soft pastels and ridiculous tiny socks, as if an apology could be knitted between the shelves. I thought about buying something, a stuffed giraffe, a board book, and mailing it with a note. But gifts felt like shortcuts, and shortcuts seldom lead anywhere good. Finally, the invitation I'd been bracing for arrived: Sophie's first birthday party. Digital confetti dotted the Evite. "Join us to celebrate our girl." The list of names included everyone from neighbors to co-workers. I clicked maybe and stared at the word until it lost its letters. Mom called again that night. "Are you going?" she asked carefully. "I don't know." "You should," she said. "If you're going to apologize, do it with your whole face." I laughed in spite of myself. "What does that even mean?" "It means not by text," she said. "Show up, speak plain, then let time do what it does." So I bought a simple gift, a cloth book with crinkly pages and bright animals. I wrote a card that didn't try to be clever: "I love you. I'm sorry for the hurt I caused. I want to do better." No defense, no but, just the words that needed to stand without scaffolding. The party was in their backyard, a mild afternoon that smelled like sunscreen and cut grass. Balloons bobbed at the fence line. A paper banner looped between two trees declared one. People I didn't know milled around paper plates and a bowl of watermelon. I stood for a moment just beyond the gate heart, a small bird trapped in my ribs. Michael saw me first. His face did something complicated, a flicker of relief, a narrowing of caution, a quick scan, as if searching me for sharp edges. He walked over. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. "I brought something for Sophie," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to somebody else. "Thanks," he said. Neutral. Not warm. Not ice. A weather report with no forecast. Vanessa was across the yard near the cake, Sophie perched on her hip in a tiny crown that said 1 in gold glitter. For once, the moment didn't reduce to a stare. It expanded. I walked over slowly, palms damp, the card tucked beneath the ribbon. "Hi," I said. Vanessa turned. I held out the gift. "Happy birthday, Sophie." Sophie's hand thumped the crinkly corner of the book, and she made a delighted noise, a pure baby squeal that hit me like sunlight after rain. Vanessa's expression didn't soften exactly, but it shifted by a degree. I placed the card on the gift table and realized my hands were shaking. I swallowed. "Vanessa," I said, meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry." The yard hummed around us, music, laughter, a sprinkler, stitching rainbows into the air. For a second, we stood in a small, quiet bubble carved out of the afternoon. "I shouldn't have said what I said," I continued. "It was careless, and it hurt you and Michael. I love Sophie. I love my brother. I won't excuse it." Vanessa studied me not with the old frosted glass, but with something more like clear pain. She nodded once, a small, precise motion. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was calm, the words landing like pebbles placed, not thrown. "It did hurt." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." Michael had drifted closer, as if drawn by gravity. He looked from Vanessa to me and back again. For a moment, I saw the 12-year-old boy on a bicycle sentence half-formed, "I've got you." He didn't say it now. He didn't have to. He just exhaled slow, and some taut line between us unspooled by an inch. The party didn't turn into a Hallmark montage. No grand reconciliation. No tearful group hug. I played with Sophie near the picnic blanket, shaking a rattle, until she giggled, my ridiculous aunt voice summoned back from storage. Vanessa chatted with a coworker. Michael refilled the cooler. We orbited carefully, like people learning a new dance step, pause, breathe. But the important thing was, the day ended without a fresh wound. We had managed to exist in the same afternoon without picking at the scab. That felt like a beginning. Small, imperfect, real. On the way out, Michael walked me to the gate. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Thanks for inviting me," I answered. We stood two people on the narrow bridge between what had been and what might be. He rubbed the back of his neck, a boyish tic that always betrayed him. "I want us to be okay," he said finally. "Me too," I said. "I'm working on it." He nodded. "We both are." The gate clicked behind me with a gentle sound that was not a slam. I carried it with me like a souvenir of a truce. Not peace, not yet, but the possibility of it. And in the quiet of that evening, it struck me that families aren't rebuilt by sweeping grand gestures. They're rebuilt by 1,000 small, ordinary mercies, a card with no excuses, a gift with no agenda, a conversation that doesn't escalate a goodbye, that sounds like a promise. Maybe nature hands us a blueprint. Maybe nurture scribbles in the margins. But the house itself, we build it with our choices one plank at a time. There's a moment I keep replaying, not the mutter that started the fire, not the phone call that poured gasoline on it, not even the careful apology looped to a ribbon and left on a table. It's smaller than all of those. It's Sophie's squeal when her hand hit the corner of that crinkly book. How immediate and uncomplicated her joy was. How it registered as sound before it had a name. I think about how quickly adults paste names onto everything: a stare, a silence, a story. How we slap labels on traits, and people like those tidy stick-on tags at yard sales. This is valuable. This is damaged. This belonged to somebody difficult. We tell ourselves we're just organizing, but sometimes we're pricing what can't be priced. I know the word I slapped on that moment: genetic. I meant it half as a joke, half as a grim observation, and entirely as a release valve for my own discomfort. But words aren't valves. They're seeds. You plant them, and whether you intend to or not, something grows. What has grown since then is not pretty, but it is honest. A garden of questions about what we inherit and what we choose about the ways fear disguises itself as wisdom about how quickly love can curdle into judgment when we feel shut out. I have learned that an apology can be true, even when it doesn't settle every argument you're having with yourself. I have learned that doing better often begins long before forgiveness arrives and must continue long after. I still don't love Vanessa's stare. Maybe I never will. But I am learning that the stare is not the person, and the person is not the lineage, and the lineage is not destiny. A baby's gaze is a mirror we hold up to ourselves. What frightened me most that day might not have been what I saw in Sophie, but what I saw in me, the part that jumps to pattern, the part that values neat narrative over messy mercy. Michael and I are speaking again. Not like before, not yet, but with intention. We send photos. We exchange small jokes. Sometimes he calls on his drive home the way he used to when we were younger, and the dusk felt safer with company. There are pauses we didn't have before, stretches where neither of us knows how to walk to the heart of things without setting off old alarms. But we're learning the route. We'll keep learning it. As for Sophie, she will grow. One day she'll be a child catching fireflies, a teenager rolling her eyes at rules, a woman deciding which parts of herself to keep and which to soften. She will stare at the world, and the world will stare back. And I hope what she sees reflected is love wild enough to hold her patient, enough to wait for her, humble enough not to label her before she's even learned all her names. So here is where I leave you, where all these long, tangled chapters bring me back to the original stubborn question. I said something that hurt people I love. I let old suspicions borrow my voice. I mistook observation for permission and cleverness for care. I apologize, and I will keep apologizing, with the shape of my choices more than the sound of my words. But this is Ada, after all. Judgment is the genre. So I'll ask you the way I've been asking myself since the second the room went silent. Was I the asshole for saying it's genetic? If your answer is yes, I can carry that, I can build with it, I can be better. If your answer is no, if you think I only said aloud what others hide behind polite smiles, then know that I understand the relief of that verdict, and I'm still not sure it would absolve me. Because intent isn't an eraser, and truth without tenderness is just a sharp thing left on the floor. In the end, maybe the point isn't to win the verdict, but to change the behavior. To keep showing up with your whole face. To deliver the card without the but. To choose again and again to be the aunt who shakes a rattle and laughs at a baby's squeal like it's the first music ever recorded. Maybe that's how we write our way out of the old scripts. Maybe that's how we outgrow the stories that don't fit anymore. Maybe that's how Family Brew's stubborn beloved keeps finding its way back to the table. So tell me your ruling if you must. I'll be here either way, practicing a quieter kind of honesty, the kind that doesn't need a clever line, the kind that keeps its sharpness far from the people it loves, the kind that when the room falls silent, lays down its words like a bridge instead of a blade.